While the US has been tangled in trade battles, Canada has been making some bold business moves in Europe. This isn't just about shaking hands and taking pictures, it's about shifting the balance of economic power. While Washington was busy with tariffs and trade disputes, Canada saw an opening and went for it. Trudeau and his team weren't just visiting Europe for diplomacy, they were there with a clear mission: to pitch Canada as the better alternative for European trade. This is a direct challenge to US suppliers. If Canada can convince NATO allies and European businesses to redirect their supply chains, it's not just about boosting Canadian companies. It's about changing the flow of economic influence across the Atlantic. And the US? It didn't see this coming. At first glance, it might not seem like a big deal. Canada has always been a close friend to both Europe and the US, right? But trade isn't just about friendships, it's about leverage. And Canada is playing its cards strategically. The message was simple: stop depending so much on US suppliers. Choose Canada instead. Why? Well, Canada is offering European companies a pretty tempting deal: competitive prices, fewer trade restrictions, and a more predictable relationship. Meanwhile, the US has been using tariffs as a political tool, making trade more unpredictable. From a business perspective, Canada's pitch is starting to make a lot of sense. At the heart of Canada's strategy is CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the EU. It's been around since 2017, but now Canada is leaning into it harder than ever. And this isn't just talk. Real money is on the line. Trade between Canada and the EU is already worth about $119 billion per year. But if even a fraction of that shifts further away from US suppliers, the economic impact could be huge. And here's the twist: this isn't just Canada making a bold play. Europe is actively looking for alternatives. For years, the US has been the go-to trade partner for NATO allies, but that might be changing. European countries are rethinking their options, looking for ways to spread their business around without completely cutting ties with Washington. And right now, Canada is stepping up with an interesting offer. So why is this happening now? Timing is everything. The US has been tightening the screws on its trade partners, throwing around tariffs, even at its allies. Just recently, Washington slapped a 25% tariff on European car imports, and businesses in Europe are getting nervous. Nobody wants to be caught in the middle of a trade battle, especially when their economy is on the line. Meanwhile, Canada is playing the long game, positioning itself as the stable and drama-free alternative. Unlike the US, it's not using trade as a bargaining chip or constantly changing the rules. That predictability is a big deal for European businesses that just want to keep things running smoothly. But there's more to this than just avoiding tariffs. Energy security has become a top priority for Europe, and many countries are looking to reduce their reliance on US energy exports. This is where Canada sees an opening. With its vast supply of oil and natural gas, it's offering itself as a dependable energy partner at a time when stability in the energy market is more important than ever. And it's not just energy. Canada is also making serious moves in industries like manufacturing, aerospace, and technology, fields where European companies need strong, reliable suppliers. The message is clear: if you're looking for a solid trade partner who won't pull the rug out from under you, Canada is ready to do business. But this isn't just about trade, it's about power. If Canada strengthens its economic ties with Europe, it doesn't just win financially, it also gains influence. For decades, the US has used its economic muscle to shape global politics, especially within NATO. But if European countries start shifting their trade alliances toward Canada, Washington's grip on transatlantic decision-making could loosen. That's a scenario the US definitely doesn't want to see. Right now, Canada is testing the waters, signing agreements, and seeing how far it can push this strategy. If European businesses start making the switch, we might be witnessing a major shakeup in global trade. One where Canada is no longer just America's backup option, but a real economic powerhouse in its own right. And the US? It's paying close attention. If Canada keeps making moves in the global market, the US will have a big decision to make. Should it try to win back European businesses by offering them better deals? Or does it turn up the heat and pressure Canada to back off? Either way, it's a risky game. If Washington pushes too hard, it might actually drive more companies toward Canada. But if it sits back and does nothing, it risks losing a key economic stronghold. This isn't just a one-time trade visit or a few handshake agreements, it's part of something much bigger. Canada is rewriting the rules of its trade playbook. Instead of depending too much on one partner, especially the US, it's spreading its reach across Europe, Latin America, and Asia. The goal? To build stronger, independent trade networks that don't leave it at the mercy of Washington's every policy change. If these deals stick, Canada will have serious leverage in future trade talks with the US. And if Washington retaliates with tariffs or new trade barriers, that might only speed up Canada's rise as a global economic power. One thing is clear, this isn't just business as usual. Canada is making a strategic push to establish itself as a major trade force. And whether the US likes it or not, that shift is already happening. The question now is, can Canada's strategy succeed? Or will the US find a way to pull Europe back into its economic orbits? Canada isn't just making empty promises, it's closing real deals. This isn't about flashy press conferences or political speeches. It's about securing a permanent spot at the global trade table. The message to Europe is loud and clear. Canada isn't just a backup plan. It's a legitimate alternative to US suppliers. And the proof? Look no further than CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between Canada and the EU. It's been around since 2017, but Canada is now pushing harder than ever to turn it into a game changer. And it's working. Since CETA took effect, trade between Canada and Europe has surged by 2/3. That's not just a minor boost. That's a full-scale shift in how business is done. But this isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about supply chains, long-term influence, and who gets to control the flow of goods across the Atlantic. For decades, the US has dominated trade with its NATO allies. Now, Canada is stepping in and challenging that dominance. Even a small shift in European supply chains from US suppliers to Canadian ones could mean billions of dollars moving out of the US economy and into Canada's. And this isn't just some hypothetical scenario. It's already happening. European businesses are actively looking to diversify where they get their goods, and Canada's giving them a real reliable option. This isn't just about dodging US tariffs or avoiding political uncertainty. It's about finding a stable, predictable trade partner. For years, the US has used trade like a bargaining chip, imposing tariffs and restrictions whenever it suits its agenda. Friends and rivals alike have felt the impact, with policies shifting based on politics rather than long-term stability. The latest move? A hefty 25% tariff on European car imports, a direct blow to industries that rely on US trade. And now businesses across Europe are rethinking their options. No company wants to get caught in the middle of a trade war, and Canada is offering them a way out. But this isn't just about avoiding tariffs, it's about the bigger picture. Canada is making a play for key industries, from energy to manufacturing, aerospace to technology. European companies that once saw US suppliers as their only option are now considering Canadian alternatives, and for good reason. Energy security is one of the biggest drivers of this shift. Europe has been trying to break free from dependence on US energy exports, especially with global markets becoming more unpredictable. Canada has stepped up as a major supplier of oil and natural gas, and that's a game changer. This isn't just about keeping the lights on, it's about independence. The less Europe relies on Washington for energy, the less influence the US has over European decisions. But Canada isn't stopping at energy. It's also ramping up its role in manufacturing. In the past, European businesses automatically turned to US suppliers for machinery, industrial equipment, and aerospace components. But with trade uncertainty looming, they're reconsidering. And Canada is making its case loud and clear. If you want reliable, long-term trade without the risk of sudden tariffs, we're the partner you need. Even industries you wouldn't expect are making adjustments. Take Linton Springley, one of the top chocolate makers in the world. The Swiss company has started tweaking its supply chains to limit its exposure to US tariffs. It's already looking at ways to source more ingredients and materials from Canada, just to avoid getting caught up in the ongoing trade disputes. It may seem like a small shift, but it's part of a much bigger trend. Now the big question is, how far will this go? Can Canada pull enough trade away from the US to tip the balance of economic power across the Atlantic? That's exactly what Washington is trying to figure out. If Canada keeps locking in deals and strengthening its trade ties with Europe, it could change the entire economic landscape of NATO. And that would put the US in a tough spot. Washington isn't going to just sit back and watch this happen. There's too much at stake. Now, the US has a decision to make. Should it fight to keep European businesses in its supply chains by offering better deals? Or does it take a harder stance and try to put pressure on Canada to back off? Both choices come with risks. If the US pushes too hard, it might actually speed up Europe's shift toward Canada. But if it does nothing, Canada could solidify itself as a true trade rival, something Washington definitely doesn't want. And that brings up another major question. Where does Canada see its relationship with the US heading? For decades, the two countries have been closely tied economically. But this moment makes one thing clear. Canada is no longer just playing the role of a junior partner. It's making moves to ensure it's not overly dependent on US trade, and it's a smart move. The more Washington leans on trade pressure tactics, the more Canada realizes it needs to diversify. But don't get the wrong idea. This isn't about cutting ties with the US. Not at all. Canada is playing a smart game. If it can secure a strong economic foothold in Europe, it won't just boost its own industries. It'll gain serious leverage in future negotiations with the US. But this isn't just about Canada making moves. European leaders are paying close attention too, and they're not making any rash decisions. Still, the offer Canada is putting on the table is hard to ignore. Right now, European businesses are looking for ways to spread their risks. They've seen what happens when a single country controls too much of their supply chain. The chaos from the pandemic, the unpredictability of US trade policies, it's all made companies nervous about relying too much on any one partner. And Canada, it's offering them a way to diversify. Energy security is another huge piece of the puzzle. With global energy markets in flux, European leaders need suppliers they can count on. Canada is stepping up, presenting itself as a stable alternative to the US. That's not something Europe can overlook, especially as it works to stabilize its energy markets and cut down on reliance on unpredictable trade partners. Then there's the bigger political picture. Strengthening trade ties with Canada doesn't just make economic sense. It gives Europe more bargaining power. If European nations know they have alternatives, they can negotiate better deals with both Washington and Beijing. They're not stuck with a single dominant supplier, which means they don't have to play by just one set of rules. Now, here's the big question. How will the US react? Washington isn't going to sit back and let this happen without a fight. For decades, it's been the dominant trade partner for NATO allies, locking in its role as the key supplier across the Atlantic. But Canada's latest push is starting to shake up that dynamic. If European businesses shift even a small portion of their supply chains away from American suppliers and toward Canadian ones, the impact could be massive. We're talking billions of dollars moving out of US industries, and more importantly, a weakening of Washington's influence. The US has long used its economic dominance as a tool, ensuring allies depend on it for stability. But Canada is stepping in with an alternative, a reliable, predictable trade partner that doesn't use tariffs or trade restrictions as a political weapon. That puts Washington in a tough spot. It now has two options. Double down economically to keep European businesses hooked on American supply chains, or pressure Canada to back off and maintain the status quo. Neither option is without risk. If the US tries to compete by offering better trade deals, we could see new incentives aimed at keeping European businesses locked in. Things like tax breaks, reduced tariffs, or exclusive agreements to make American suppliers the more attractive choice. But the problem is, the US has already built a reputation for unpredictable trade policies. That's exactly why European businesses are considering Canada in the first place. Just look at the US decision to slap a 25% tariff on European car imports. That move sent shockwaves through the EU, forcing manufacturers to rethink their reliance on American trade. It's decisions like these that are making European leaders wonder if they need a more stable, long-term alternative. And Canada is right there, ready to fill that role. If the US tries to clamp down on Canada with stricter trade policies, it could end up doing the exact opposite of what it intends, pushing Europe even closer to Canadian suppliers. Then there's another possibility: direct pressure on Canada itself. If Washington sees its influence over NATO trade slipping, it might start making life harder for Canadian exports. It wouldn't be the first time. We've seen this kind of strategy before. The US has used tariffs against Canadian steel and aluminum in the past, and history seems to be repeating itself. Just recently, Washington doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, bringing them up to 50%. That's not just a minor disagreement, it's a clear warning shot. But Canada isn't just standing by. In response, Ontario suspended a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US, making it clear that it's willing to fight back. This back and forth is exactly why Canada is working so hard to diversify its trade partnerships. Every time Washington tightens the screws, it becomes even more obvious that depending too much on the American market is a risky game. That's why Canada is strengthening its ties with Europe, Latin America, and Asia. So it isn't left vulnerable when Washington decides to turn trade into a political weapon. And Canada isn't the only one paying attention. Europe is watching this unfold, and it's taking notes. The EU has seen firsthand how Washington uses trade policies to gain leverage, and that's made European leaders cautious about relying too much on American suppliers. Canada gives them an opportunity to broaden their supply chains without completely cutting ties with the US, a safety net in case Washington becomes even more unpredictable. This shift is already happening, but it raises a big question. Did Washington miscalculate? Trade experts are now debating whether US leaders saw this coming or if they underestimated just how fast Canada would move. For a long time, Canada was seen as a cooperative partner that mostly aligned with American economic policies. But now, it's proving that it's willing to take a different path, one that prioritizes its own interests over simply maintaining the status quo. And this isn't just about a few trade deals, it's part of a much bigger shift. Canada is positioning itself as a global trade force in its own right, not just an extension of the US economy. Stronger partnerships with Europe mean Canada isn't fully dependent on American markets. Expanding energy exports puts Canada in a position to be a global supplier rather than just a secondary option. And by making sure its economy is spread across multiple trading partners, Canada is reducing the leverage Washington has traditionally held over it. For decades, the US has been able to call the shots in trade negotiations with Canada. But if this trend continues, that power dynamic could start to shift, and Washington knows it. That's why the US response in the coming months could be crucial in shaping what happens next. If the US wants to hold on to its economic dominance, it could try to make it harder for European businesses to partner with Canada. That could mean new trade barriers, additional tariffs, or even diplomatic pressure to steer NATO allies away from Canadian suppliers. But if Washington goes too far, it could backfire. European leaders have already made it clear that they're open to exploring new trade partnerships. If the US tries to force them into a corner, it could end up pushing them even faster toward Canada, and possibly other alternatives. That could set off a chain reaction, leading to a major shift in transatlantic trade that sees the US losing some of the influence it's held for so long. If the US chooses to sit back and do nothing, it could end up watching Canada solidify its position as a serious global trade player. If European businesses start consistently choosing Canadian suppliers and locking in long-term trade agreements, this could mark the beginning of a major shift. The US would still be a powerhouse, but it wouldn't be the only dominant force shaping NATO's economic future. So, what's Washington's next move? Right now, it's watching and waiting, but that won't last forever. At some point, a decision has to be made. Does the US see Canada as a growing competitor that needs to be kept in check? Or does it try to maintain a friendly relationship, knowing that Canada's influence in Europe is only getting stronger? Either way, this is about much more than just trade. It's about power, alliances, and long-term strategy. What Canada is doing isn't just about boosting exports. It's about rewriting the rules of who holds economic influence across the Atlantic. If this strategy pays off, we could see an entirely new trade landscape, one where Canada plays a much bigger role. European businesses spread their supply chains more evenly, and the US finds itself working harder to maintain its dominance. And that's where things start getting interesting. If this is just a short-term push, it might not change much. But if Canada keeps gaining momentum, this could be the start of something much bigger. Washington isn't blind to what's happening. If Canada becomes a real alternative for NATO trade, the US won't just stand by. It will push back. The real question is, how? Will Washington step up and offer better trade deals to keep European businesses from looking elsewhere? Will it try to pressure Canada into aligning with US trade policies? Or will it take the risk of allowing Canada to establish itself as a legitimate competitor on the global stage? If you found this video interesting, be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.